We have to study the unreal cardio of Merab Dvalishvili. I swear, I constantly see this guy climbing trees, running up mountains, and recently this video has been spreading online, and it's simply unreal. Of course, I don't know exactly how long this pool is, but it's pretty damn long, and the guy just has lungs the size of his entire body. Last week, we just saw another insane display of Merab's cardio in the octagon as he outpaced and outcardioed Umar Nurmagomedov. Despite getting beat in those first two rounds and honestly looking like he couldn't get a takedown to save his life, Merab literally laughed it off in the third and outlasted a Nurmagomedov. I will never get that image out of my head of Umar having trouble getting up in the fourth, and seeing a Dagestani wrestler get gassed like that in the wrestling department was a sight I thought I would never see. And then after that, Merab took the mic and ran his mouth even more without taking a breath. This guy's cardio is on another level, and he's starting to put up some all-time numbers to show for it. So for those who don't know or have never experienced, getting takedowns is really goddamn tough and probably the most labor-intensive thing to do in MMA, because you're using your entire body to control another body of similar body weight, and the cardio needed is just absolutely crazy. So with that note on takedowns being a good metric for how good someone's cardio is, check out these numbers coming from Merab. With that Umar win, he surpasses the great George St. Pierre with 92 takedowns landed, the most in UFC all time. Of course, he also set the record for most takedowns attempted in a single fight with 49 in his fight against Petr Yan, crushing the previous record of 33 set by Cain Velasquez. In his historic last 5 fights, where he has had to face 4 former champions and a Nurmagomedov in a row, he has attempted a crazy 30 takedowns in his Umar fight, 15 in his Sean fight, 11 in his Henry Cejudo fight, that monster 49 in his Petr Yan fight, and then finally 16 in his Jose Aldo fight. That's an average of 24.2 takedowns attempted in his last 5, and per minute, the guy is averaging a monster 5.56 takedowns per minute in his fights. I don't know if you guys have ever shot for takedowns. Granted, I'm coming from a striking base, so I get gassed out pretty quickly, but still 5.5 takedowns per minute is absurd levels of cardio for anybody. For reference, a guy that's known for having a similar style, pretty good pace and cardio in Colby Covington doesn't even come close to those numbers, as in his last 5 fights, Colby only averages 9.2 takedowns in those last 5 and a measly 2.11 takedowns per minute in his fights. Still, those are pretty solid numbers, but again, those numbers get eclipsed by Merab's. And though takedowns attempted are a really good metric for someone's cardio, Merab's strikes attempted are equally impressive, if not more, considering he's doing this on top of shooting a fuck ton of takedowns as a wrestler. In those last 5 fights, Merab also surpassed 100 significant strikes twice, with 147 landed in his fight against Petr Yan, and then just recently 111 strikes landed in his fight with Umar. And when we look at his total strikes, he's frequently surpassing 250 strikes attempted, which is in the ballpark of Max Holloway. And I can't stress this enough, but he's doing this on top of averaging 24.2 takedown attempts in these fights. So yeah, those are some pretty crazy numbers in both the striking department and the wrestling department. So of course, the next question is, how the hell does he do it? Merab's cardio is really hard to explain, because initially what confuses me is how jacked he is while being able to pull off some of these insane cardio feats. Most guys that we hail for their cardio don't carry that much muscle. Guys like Colby Covington, Nate Diaz, and Max Holloway are built like this, which makes sense because of their high pace and volume striking or wrestling can't be weighed down by muscle. Joe Rogan, the king of bro science and also actual science, explains that bigger muscles require more oxygen, and thus guys that carry more muscle mass typically get gassed out quicker. And logically, athletes in endurance heavy sports like running just don't typically carry that much muscle. So for Merab to look like this at bantamweight and still pull off the numbers he's pulling off in the UFC, again, doesn't really make sense to me. So the next explanation is that the guy has a third lung. Okay, maybe he doesn't actually have a third lung, but he does have something genetically to explain why his cardiovascular system works 10 times better than the average fighter. One theory I had is that he just simply was born with a bigger lung capacity, but that doesn't really make sense either. I'm no doctor, so from what I read online, it seems like lung to body size is pretty proportional. So a larger person would have a larger lung capacity, and smaller people would have a smaller lung capacity. Which is where shit starts to not make sense, because Merab is only about 5'5" to 5'6", outpacing guys that are typically 3 to 5 inches taller than him. Maybe it's because his torso is a giant square and maybe his lungs are square like instead of a long rectangle. I don't know. I'm a software engineer, not a doctor, so I'm just spitballing here. But physically, Merab having the cardio he has doesn't make sense, which leads to another theory, more of a conspiracy theory, mind you. Okay, by conspiracy theory, I have to admit it's just MMA Guru and a bunch of people on Reddit that probably look like him claiming that the levels of cardio we're seeing out of Merab can only be explained by PEDs, which I can kind of understand. I mean, looking at the numbers, Merab is an absolute anomaly across the board with how many takedowns and strikes he attempts. They're astronomically high, and especially after the 49 takedowns and over 400 strikes he attempted against Petr Yan, a lot of people question whether or not this guy is juicing. Fellow bantamweight great TJ Dillashaw famously popped for EPO, which is a PED that actually aids in oxygen consumption and is commonly used in endurance sports like cycling. So is Merab on EPO like TJ? Probably not. Merab has been in the UFC for a very, very long time, 8 years in fact, and considering he hasn't tested positive for anything, is a pretty good indicator of him being clean. And I finally also considered the fact that he's from the Caucasus Mountains of Georgia, but I looked up the elevation of the capital city of Tbilisi, and it's actually pretty average at about 380 to 700-ish meters above sea level. For reference, Denver, known for its elevation, is 1,600 meters above sea level, so I doubt Merab's hometown has anything to do with his cardio. Okay, so it's not his body type, it's not the PEDs, and it's not the Caucasus Mountains. So what the hell is it? I think oddly enough, I think his mental and his game plan explains his cardio. Let me explain. Okay, so GSP has a really underrated book called The Way of the Fight that explains his mentality and preparation during his prime. One of the stories that will always stick with me is his second fight with BJ Penn. He explains that to defeat BJ Penn in a more dominant fashion in the rematch, he found out to defeat BJ Penn's insanely fast reaction time, he had to take advantage of BJ's poor reset time, or time it takes to react to something and then reset to attacking or defending. And I think this is the key to Merab's game. Merab overwhelms his opponent's nervous system by not allowing them to rest and constantly keeping opponents on edge by having to decide whether they need to defend the 30th takedown or the 300th strike. That level of constant decision making in the heat of the moment, like GSP says, has to completely tire a person mentally and eventually physically, and we've seen this in the Umar fight, and we've definitely seen this in the Petr Yan fight. Conversely, I think because Merab only has one mode of attack and is rarely, if ever, needing to react to a fighter, he himself can reserve a lot of mental bandwidth. Think about it. Nate Diaz, Max Holloway, and Colby Covington are all extremely offensive fighters that just move forward. They don't often have to think about moving laterally, changing pace, or switching from defense to offense, at least in the case of Max before he switched up his style and was the volume king. It may seem counterintuitive that moving forward and producing more leads to better cardio, but when you have practically one game plan, you reserve both physical stamina since your body has gotten extremely efficient at a small set of moves, be it striking or takedowns, but most importantly, you reserve mental stamina as well, as constant decision making is practically out the door. For Merab, I don't think there's much critical decision making going on in that head. So I really think the secret to Merab's insane cardio isn't his body, but his brain. He only has one mode: move forward, shoot a shit ton of takedowns, and punch a bunch. I would imagine he trains this constantly. His body has become extremely efficient at this small set of moves, and his brain can reserve so much bandwidth because there's not much decision making going on outside of this. So again, this way of fighting, along with probably some genetic gift, is his secret to insane cardio. So what do you guys think about Merab's cardio? Is it because of his game plan and mental, or was he really just born with giant fucking lungs, or a third lung at that? Anyways, thank you guys for watching and always supporting, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.